And what is psychosis then? Well, psychosis is the experience that we might be confronted in life with some of these paradoxes, but at these points, the symbolic is no longer functioning. When there is no cultural framework, no social framework, no body of organized thought, no formulations that are available for you to deal with that contradiction. Well, that's for Lacan, this very precise point where the psychosis needs to be situated. So psychosis as a structure means that for an individual, the symbolic is not functioning at that very specific point, at that very specific moment. And how will that be expressed clinically? Well, in terms of a breach in the experience of the symbolic. And then Lacan will stress that you will have like linguistic experiences, like for example, voice hearing as a psychotic phenomenon for Lacan. That's like a disorganized signifier. That's like a word coming from outside, as if it's gone from the coherence of the symbolic system. It's out in the wild. And it's this out in the wild occurring signifier that is in psychosis that I'm confronted with. And therefore, in psychosis, it is also perplexing, because where does this word come from? Where does this idea come from? Where does this feeling come from? I don't know. It comes out of the blue. And therefore, it has this perplexing impact. And that's for me like the basic psychotic experience, how I, from a Lacanian perspective, kind of understand it.
Yes, yes. I mean, here's probably where I don't know if this is the proper term to use. You say in the book we should be a bit more uh, caring or sympathetic towards people going through a psychotic episode and not treat it like a deviance, as you said, is because when they do confront this real and their kind of existing symbolic structure, it splits, it breaks, this antagonism, it causes them to create their own symbolic world. You say, you use the examples of what's the Kusama, the Japanese artist, and then you use Carl Jung and Ulysses. So, I mean, I still want to discuss James Joyce. I mean, not Ulysses, that's his novel. James Joyce and Carl Jung for sure. But could you like touch on, yeah, once the psychotic subject is has this break, let's say, how they do through as a psychotic subject, how they deal with this break by, in some sense, creating their own reality.
Yeah, yeah. But let me first stress one other point. It's precisely because we conceptualize psychosis from this Lacanian perspective as like an impossibility of using the symbolic system in treating the problem of the real that they are confronted with. If we have this focus, we kind of have a definition or an idea of psychosis which says that psychosis is actually a confrontation with the very basic point of what the human being is. So it's not, and it's something that you had in your preparatory notes that you sent me. It's not for Lacan. Psychosis is not a deviance. It's not a failure. It's not like something that is so that is not human. No, it's in its essence that's actually what a human being is.
Yeah.
It is illustrated in psychosis much more clearly than it is in neurosis, what a human struggle, what humanity actually is, what being human consists of. And so I found that always very intriguing in Lacan, that psychosis is not that illness that is strange and that is kind of going away from the essence of humanity, because maybe your genes are like so disordered, or in ancient times they sometimes thought it's like humans become animals again when they go crazy. No, for Lacan, it's rather when someone has a psychotic experience, it's like an encounter with the basic challenge of being a human
In
being.
fact, they're most human in some sense.
But something of what we tend to cover up with symbolic functioning is laid bare. And so therefore we can observe more clearly what it is, the challenge of being human. And so psychosis is that very testimony of the challenge of being human. And when you cannot make use of the collectivity of the group in defining your existence, then something of the very crude thing of what human being is demonstrated. And so that's the psychotic experience. And so therefore, ethically speaking, this implies that well, we need to be there. We need to be there for someone who is being confronted with that very point, with that truth, that point of truth. If neurosis is maybe a lie, neurosis is a lie because we cover up the real of what we are confronted with nice stories, with dreams, like dreams at night, but also like the dreams that we have, the dreams for a future, the dreams for a political program. We cover up things. And so it's maybe some way of denying, of misrecognizing, Lacan would say, misrecognizing that element of the real. While psychosis is the experience of you can no longer misrecognize the very fundamental problem that you're confronted with. And so ethically speaking, that's precisely, I think, the point where the psychoanalysts should be like trying to be there to survive that very moment.
Indeed, indeed. Actually, if I may, Professor, before you continue with the rest of the answer, I'm just going to read out this excerpt because I think the listener, more for the listener here, would appreciate this. So you say apropos madness and freedom. You discuss a lot, especially in the beginning of the book. You discuss madness, and you say here on page 20, what if psychosis is an inherent part of being human? Jacques Lacan regarded madness as a limit experience of human freedom. So you draw the connection between kind of madness and freedom. And you say meaning and experience in which our capacity for astonishment, creative invention, and nonconformist actions is expressed to the fullest. True, it is an uncomfortable and disconcerting limit with which to be confronted, and one that can lead to a great and terrifying loneliness. And that was a really important point too, that notion of why we should support people through this episode. And then say that generates a passionate need for connectedness. But at the same time, it sheds a light like no other on our psychological functioning as human beings. So I thought that really encapsulates what you're trying to get at. And more importantly, what I really appreciated with this was, maybe I'm completely off track here, but yeah, there's something where even the examples you've used in the book, they're all people who are extremely creative, people who are artistic, from like Joyce to Jung and the architect you used. So there is something where it's like this explosion of freedom. It's terrifying, but at the same time, it gives rise to something genuinely new in reality.
Yeah.
And there's something there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the very idea that psychosis and invention are very closely connected to one another.
Mm.
And this is not the case in neurosis. In neurosis is more about repetition.
Yeah.
Neurosis is repeating the canon of the group. It's repeating the rules. It's repeating what the other has already written. And it's repeating in your own words. Neurotic painting is painting within a school. It's painting within a tradition. And then you could say that psychosis is when there is no tradition anymore, the only thing you can do is invent. Like with the little bits and pieces that are around you, you are inventing. And it's not just like an intentional act, like I'm gonna invent. No, the unconscious invents
Indeed. Indeed.
because that's what the unconscious does. When someone is hallucinating, well, the unconscious is inventing. when someone is seeing strange things, well, the unconscious is inventing. The unconscious is reacting, is doing something, is like presenting something in relation to the unpresentable real. So there is an act of invention in every psychosis, and we tend to neglect that. And I'm not saying that all people suffering from psychosis are potentially very good artists, but they are inventors in a certain sense. And therefore, I actually decided to start a book with a completely different case, like my case of my patient Mario, who had Down's syndrome and a very low IQ in terms of the group. Um, but he was also an inventor in his own way. Like he was doing funny things. And that being funny and being a little bit strange was a way of inventing things and of breaking the convention of repetitive ways of interacting. And so that's the possibility that is there in psychosis. And of course, when I use examples that are accessible for everybody, because I can, of course, like as a psychoanalyst, speak only from my private practice. And then we have examples that we cannot check. Well, there are other examples that everybody can check. And then we end up like indeed with artists who kind of demonstrate, many of them, like the ones you listed, they went to very difficult episodes in their lives. They went to the moment of having nothing anymore to believe in, having nothing anymore to believe in reality or believe in their own existence. And at the same time, they took something serious. What did they take serious? They took seriously what was occurring to them, what was spontaneously there. And what is it that is spontaneously there for the human being? The unconscious. Because the unconscious is what spontaneously pops up in my consciousness without me as an ego directing the thing that is occurring in my consciousness. So that's by definition the Lacanian unconscious. It's in terms of what you refer to seminar 11. It's something that opens and closes the unconscious. So when it opens, it pushes something into my consciousness. Well, what is being pushed into my consciousness at that point? Well, listen to it, attend to it, pay attention to it. That's the thing that needs to be done, and therefore, it's something that a psychoanalyst should do. We should listen to the persons who have the psychotic experiences because it is a manifestation of the unconscious, and that's our specialty. We are working with the unconscious. So it's precisely in working with people with psychosis that the psychoanalyst should be, because there, our action terrain of working with the unconscious is very obviously there.
So I tried to read Ulysses a few years ago and I kind of gave up. It was too hard. I'm going to try again now, maybe in 1 or 2 years, use like an annotated version probably. But like a writer like James Joyce, for instance, and I know like Lacan really did theorize on him and like speak on him, but can you tell us more about James Joyce, like the way he writes, kind of the way he uses language? Is this him trying to deal with this like split in his symbolic reality? And kind of how do you think the unconscious, let's say for James Joyce, plays a role there?
Yeah, well, that's a very difficult
Oh,
question that you ask.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because here, of course, when you refer to Joyce, I must think about what Lacan has said about
yeah,
Joyce,
seminar.
because it's in his seminar 23 that Lacan returns to the question of psychosis in depth. So Lacan had a seminar in the 50s, his seminar 3, on the topic of psychosis, and then it's later on, 20 years later, that he starts discussing psychosis again, and then to many people's surprise, also using James Joyce as an example to ask the question about psychosis. And why do everybody surprised, or many people surprised? Because Joyce was not like clinically mad. Joyce was maybe like a really particular guy, very peculiar maybe in his own way, but he was not clinically mad. And so that was surprising. James Joyce's daughter, Lucia, she had psychosis. She was treated by Jung, but James Joyce himself not. But Lacan's idea here is that it is Joyce is teaching something about psychosis because Joyce has a very specific relation to convention. And then we see that, of course, when you read Ulysses, you read a modernist book. But when we say modernism, we already situated within a tradition, within a school.
Yeah, it's like
Well, I think that yeah, that Lacan is rather pointing no, Joyce is not modernism, Joyce is Joycean because it's not repeating something, it's inventing a new language for a very specific problem that he had been confronted with. Um, and so it's not relying on tradition, it's not relying on the father, so it's not neurotic writing in the sense that it's little stories, because for Lacan, the neurotic unconscious is something and the Freudian unconscious is storytelling. But for Lacan, that's not. Lacan radicalizes the question of the unconscious. For Lacan, the unconscious is surprise, the surprising occurrence of an inconsistent element. That's the unconscious, not the romantic stories, not the story of my aggression, not the story of my sexual fantasies. For Lacan, that's not the unconscious. The unconscious is the surprising occurrence of a symbolic element that is in some way, yeah, baffling for the human subject. And so Joyce is used in that respect. And what will Lacan stress in the case of Joyce? That is that something of the coherence between the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real is disrupted in Joyce's case. Because that these are, of course, like the three Lacanian registers that make up reality. It's because we have this confrontation with the real and we treat it with language and with convention. That's the symbolic, and with the imaginary. And the imaginary is the thing that we create meaning and images around things. So for everybody works along these lines. But then Lacan will say like, yeah, but in Joyce, there was a very specific point where this knotting together of the three registers was disorganized. And where is it very specifically? Well, Lacan will trace it down to one of Joyce's earlier books, where Joyce describes that as a young man, he was beaten by mates at school, but in such a way that when he was hit by them, he didn't feel it anymore. He heard the hitting, he heard the words they were saying, but he didn't feel it anymore. So it's as if something of the pain experience, something of the affective connection to the body was lost. And then Lacan will say, like, look, there is this very specific vulnerability in Joyce, and it is that the ego, which is the imaginary, tends to flee away, tends to get disconnected from the real, of the organism of the body, and from the symbolic. So the imaginary tends to go away. You could, through that angle, you could look at Joyce's works, because there, of course, as a reader, it's sometimes difficult, especially in Finnegan's Wake, to find meaning. Well, for Lacan, that's exactly the point. Meaning is a bit everywhere. It's playing with meaning, but it's not conventional meaning. Well, it's using convention, but in such a way that everything narrative about it and every standard thing about it is lost. So it's something, it's playing with language, it's playing with convention, but in such a way that convention is no longer there. So it's something of the imaginary that was went lost. But then in Lacan's idea, Joyce did not become mad, did not go crazy in the clinical sense of the word, because he found the solution. And what was Joyce's solution is that the disorganization of language that was in some way produced in Joyce, he made an art of it. Like he started writing in a very specific way, and his specific way of writing was also connected to the recreation of an ego. And the recreation of the ego in Joyce is the fact that Joyce himself thinks that he's an artist, that the things that he's doing with language, the way language very spontaneously pops up in him and he writes it down, well, he thinks that this is artistic creation and that he is an inventor. So for Lacan, that's the imaginary thing. The idea of Joyce that he is an artist is an answer to something of the disconnection between the imaginary on the one hand and the real and the symbolic on the other hand. So Joyce is being confronted with the basic problem that is also always the problem of psychosis, but Joyce is also the one who did not go on the track of developing severe suffering from it because he invented a solution, and that is what Lacan then will call Joyce has a symptom, which is sounding very similar to a symptom, but Lacan calls it a symptom, like it's similar to a symptom, but it's not producing suffering. But it's also, just like a symptom is a solution to a problem, well, the symptom is also a solution to the problem.
Yes, yes. And I mean, here, I probably should mention like the Borromean knot, right? The fact that, like,
Yeah.
in some sense, Joyce figured out sounds too conclusive, but Joyce managed, let's say, to, with these three registers to kind of work through them so that he could just, in some sense, survive and not die from his suffering in a very
Yeah.
sense. Um,